Before Afrobeats and hip-hop took over Zambia in the modern day, there was a genre that took Zambia by storm in the 1970s, and this genre was called Zamrock. Mainly influenced by artists like Jimi Hendrix, Black Sabbath, James Brown, Elvis, and bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, Zamrock took over the radio and nightclubs in the 1970s. But how did this sensational genre emerge? In this video, we're exploring how music in the form of Zamrock became one of the most impactful forms of art in Zambia's history. After Zambia got independence in 1964, the British higher class that remained in Zambia started importing music records from Britain, and once those records reached Zambia, everyone had a chance to experience the music, either poor or rich, black or white. Every person in Zambia danced to the records imported by the rich British people. The records were music of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, James Brown, Elvis, and many other British musicians and bands. Soon, the young people in the country started covering the music like Hey Joe by Jimi Hendrix.
Every guitarist in my country who called themselves guitarists, they started by playing Hey Joe.
Then bands like the Lusaka Beatles, who covered the Beatles, or the Ray 5, who modeled themselves after the Rolling Stones, started performing across Zambia. Unfortunately, Zambia didn't have any recording studios at the time, so the musicians could only perform but couldn't record their music. But these are the musicians that ended up forming some of the biggest Zamrock bands in Zambia. The name Zamrock was proposed by a DJ at the time because it was a blend of psychedelic, rock, and kalindula. Rock musicians Ricky Ililonga and his band Mosi Otunya are widely regarded as the inventors of Zamrock. They released their first LP called Wings of Africa, which was a mix of Afrobeats and a deep purple sound. Another British band. Ricky wanted to leave the full British way of making music, then he and his band started adding the Zambian and African sound to the British rock. After working with his band for a while, Ricky Ililonga decided to go solo and started making music by himself, releasing his first solo album called Zambia, featuring songs like She Being Queen. Another famous Zamrock band is which is short for We Intend to Cause Havoc, which was formed and headed by Emmanuel Jagari Chanda, which released the first ever commercial album in Zambia. This album was called Introduction. The record had a psychedelic garage rock sound. They had to get their records pressed in Nairobi, Kenya, as this was the closest record point, and they only made 200 records as that was all Emmanuel and his manager could manage to carry in their luggage at the time, which later released another album called Lazy Bones. Another great musician on the Zamrock was Paul Ngozi. He was a member of the band Ngozi family. Paul Ngozi was credited with creating the Kalindula sound, a rhythmic pop music sound with fuzzy electric guitar leads centered around the bass guitar of the same name. Another famous artist is Keith Lev. He started the Rolling Stone inspired band Rave 5. He released a few records starting in 1976, including his hit record Ubuntungwa, which became a mainstream hit and is still popular in Zambia today. Another band was Amanas. The band members included miners and anti-colonial freedom fighters. They released an album called Africa, which has a hit like Kala My Friend. The timing for the start of Zamrock was perfect because at the time Zambia had just gotten independence and Kaunda was working on building a nation identity for Zambia. In June 1975, President Kaunda ordered that every radio station in Zambia plays 90% Zambian music, which was a golden ticket for the bands that just released new albums. The band played in taverns near the mines as young miners would spend their time and money having a good on weekend after a long week of work. The bands would also be hired by hotels to perform for their guests, especially on weekends. The search for a national identity and growing workforce that wanted to have a good time, Zamrock became a sensation in the 70s. Despite Zambia being independent, its neighboring countries were still under colonial rule, and President Kaunda was actively supporting the neighboring countries' freedom fighters to overthrow the colonial rulers. This posed a threat to Zambia in the 1970s, which made the government put measures in place to protect the citizens, and one of those measures was a national curfew. This national curfew prevented bands from playing shows at night. For bands to perform, the audience would have to be locked in the venue for 12 hours from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. to avoid getting caught. In 1984, Zambia's first HIV case was reported, and by 1990, nearly 13% of the adult population was infected. And since the musicians were living a rock and roll lifestyle, they were the most vulnerable to HIV. Sadly, almost all the original Zamrock artists died from what were believed to be HIV-related deaths. Only a few were lucky, like Jagari and Ililonga, who got out of the music or got out of the country
and are still alive today. Although Zamrock is no longer Zambia's main genre, it is still celebrated, and its history lives on as it is still being sampled by major artists like Sampa the Great and Tyler the Creator, just to mention a few.